our people don't want to participate in these things. And then on a secondary or tertiary result of that is our doctors in the Indian Health Service and other medical facilities that serve Native peoples misdiagnosing and mistreating our people because they don't have the current research that has to do with our populations. They are giving them too high a dose of blood thinners, for instance, and causing strokes. There's a lot of those things. Marcia is very fond of saying, research, you can't research other people to find out the solutions to problems here. And so what we always say is we need to grow our own. We need to educate people, send them off, get them educations, and have them come home and take care of our own people. And by looking at the faces I see that we have grown our own and we are continuing to grow our own. But now we have to come back and try to take care of our people with the burden of mistrust on our shoulders because of the profession that we've decided to participate in.
The short answer is at the moment, I don't know that we can guarantee protections in these trials. That is why I feel it's so important that we create the materials and the products that do inform our communities, so that if they decide to participate in these clinical trials or any others in the future, they have the information they need to make those decisions and understand what the risks are and weigh it against the benefits. But I'm afraid it's up to us. It's not, the cab that I am serving on for Active 2, I do feel like there's an urgency. Even if we get a vaccine, we're still going to need treatments to keep people from getting hospitalized and on ventilators. And there's an urgency to finding vaccines that are effective and safe.
Thinking of all the studies I've been in and the conversations that we have in the equity and research, to point to one thing that would assure protection, because it really is about oversight and who is doing that oversight. But on the flip side of that coin, it's also about educating our community and talking to them point blankly about research, what it is, what it does, and why it's so important. And I know that question is coming up, so I won't elaborate on that, but when you're going over the protocols, it's so important of the study. It's so important that the person who is giving those protocols understand that they are, talking to a native, they're talking to a Korean lady, and they have to, not talk in research talk, but they have to speak in ways that they are assured we understand what they're talking about. That's why I continually stress all the time that these protocols need to be geared towards the culture that we're looking at. And they need to be culturally competent.
I largely agree with what's just been said. I have my face mask on now, so I might sound just a touch muffled, but it is up to us. It's up to us to communicate with our relatives in such a way, both as to help them to set aside that distrust. At the same time, as a council person asked me just several weeks ago, if in offering trials to our people, can I guarantee, do I have your guarantee, Dr. Henderson, that no one will suffer an adverse event? Well, naturally, I said, no, I cannot guarantee that. In fact, it's very likely that some people will have adverse events, and hopefully they'll be mild and self-limited, but I cannot give you a guarantee no one won't have a very serious, severe adverse event, including, the potential loss of their life. We simply do not know. That's what makes clinical research in general, but especially in the context of COVID, so very daunting. But at the same time, those people who will, when confronted with the decision whether to participate or not, do in fact decide to, I know personally, I will so honor, their selflessness. Perhaps not many of us here both have been on the primary care side, delivering healthcare, but I've also done clinical research in the past, and it's dramatically different types of interactions. Generally, trial participants are not sick. They're not ill. They're not cranky. You don't see them at their worst, generally speaking. They're usually happy. They're upbeat. They're giving of themselves, giving of their time. They're appreciative of what trial site staff are doing for them, trying to do for them. And the last thing I would say about what things that have been mentioned, any of you who have undergone good clinical practice, GPC training, know that these protocols that we see right now from these COVID pharma companies, each and every one complies to the letter of the International Council for Harmonization E6 standards for what ought to be included in the informed consent documents. One of those items that's supposed to be in there that isn't typically in protocols we've used in other research is, of course, what some of us now know is the schedule of events. Boy, for this Novavax trial, that schedule of events spills over 8 different pages in length. I was stunned to see that, but I understand why it's that way. So part of this is the frameworks that much of this style of research is predicated upon. It certainly probably had little and no input from Indigenous peoples.
And Jeff has to make a statement like, I can't guarantee you that people won't be harmed by this. The follow-up statement could be, but I can guarantee you that people will be harmed if we don't participate and we don't have access to these vaccines. And I also don't believe that people should be compelled to participate, but I do believe that people should be compelled to consider participation and to inform themselves about what participation means. We should be demanding that of our people. We should be hoping that our young ones grow up to be researchers so that they can do it ethically with and for our people instead of to our people like research has been done in the past.
We always want to respect tribal sovereignty. No clinical trial or research should happen on tribal lands without approval of the individual tribes in whatever way they want that approval. We do know a lot of researchers try to bypass that by going to urban Indian places. And in the world of Indigenous data sovereignty right now, UIHI has been leading, and we have been doing a practical application of Indigenous data sovereignty and the protection of our people, knowing that we are tribal people regardless of where we live. So one of the things that we've been providing support, and knowing that we don't have to let researchers into our organizations without our approvals. So we've been working to support and organizations across the country. That's another one of the reasons we want to create this resource. What are the questions they need to ask of these clinical trials prior to letting them in their organization? When we talk about a 20-page informed consent document, I think about, our grandmas. Would they understand that? What do they need if there's a 20-page informed consent that is necessary from what Jeff just said? I'm interested in reading it because I'm nerdy like that. But, maybe we have to insist, and we've done this before, that for these informed consent documents, rather than just handing them to somebody and say, I'll be back in a half hour, you want somebody to read it with them and talk through that. Like, how do we ensure that the plain language that Bill was talking about, that Guthrie was talking about, how do we ensure that this is happening? We need to make sure that there's not secondary use of data without informing both the participants and the organizations. There has to be, representation. We need to build our own evidence. We need evidence within these clinical trials of what works in our communities and what doesn't. And right now, I just got updated on this, but out of the clinical trials in the United States on COVID vaccine right now, only Moderna has a 30% diversity. I don't even know how many Native people, but they have about 30% of the trial as is are non-Hispanic white people. 70% is non-Hispanic white people. 30% are diverse populations. All of the other trials are in the teens right now in terms of diverse representation. We have to give our people the opportunity to make a good decision on whether or not they would like to participate in these trials, because we want a vaccine that stops the spread of this virus within our communities.
Everybody has had a friend, a relative, or yourself, some had an experience that was adverse to some sort of medication. I think it was Guthrie who brought up blood thinners like warfarin. Those clinical trials, when that medication was being tested, largely included participants that were not from underrepresented communities. And we do find that getting the dose right, which was developed based on those clinical trials, is not as easy to do with some of our American Indian and Alaska Native relatives.
It keeps everybody safe. If you have proper representation from all cultures that are studying a new medication, they can see with different cultures how that medication affects them, if it does. And so that's why I joined Equity in Research, because Natives historically do not participate in research. And I would love to see the day when, we have an army of people from our culture, involved in research. And I would think that would be a great discussion for the future on what that would look like and how do we go about even beginning to look at how to accomplish that. But my biggest fear is that, especially with regards to HIV and AIDS, is that with research, Natives are just being left behind.
This is Jeff. I have an additional perspective on this topic of representation. I totally agree that the diversity of trial participants needs to be promoted and advanced, including our relatives. But living in a place like Rapid City, if any of you know what Rapid City and Western South Dakota in general, is like for race relations, here at our trial sites, we will be recruiting everyone. And I went to bat right when we first got into this discussion about potentially bringing trial sites here to say that I want our sites to be open. And here in Rapid City, I'm assembling a seven member staff. 5 of them will be tribal, Lakota, but 2 won't. And what I envision should happen, and the reason I've been trying for years to start clinical research here, is because I know the interpersonal touch that especially Native women have, will work to bring down the guards of non-natives. Firstly, but I think what's going to happen is when all is said and done, when we have an exit interview with one of our non-native trial participants who've been treated by a mostly native trial staff, I think that their eyes will have been wide open, they'll be woke, and they'll be a different person when they return back into the community. And that'll be a process. That won't be like turning on a light switch, but I sincerely believe that that can happen, needs to happen, especially in a place like Rapid City.